Next up, we're going to sew the patch pockets. I'm putting 2 onto this apron, or alternatively the pattern has 1 large one, so you can make that decision at the beginning before you cut it out. You get your 2 pieces of fabric, so your outer fabric and your lining, which can be the same or different, so I've used a contrast here, and you put them right sides together, and you're going to pin them around, and what you need to do is leave a gap at the bottom edge of about 2.5 inches, and that's what you're going to use to pull the pocket through. A patch pocket essentially is an external pocket, so it's not sewn into the seams of a garment. It's made up completely in its own right, and then it's attached to the garment afterwards. So you can see on here I've stitched these round, and there's a gap here which is on the bottom of the pocket, and I'll just show you on the machine, because when you're sewing them you want to keep the needle in the fabric to pivot and turn and make these corners. For sewing up the pockets, we recommend a stitch length of 3. The seam allowance for sewing up the pockets is 3/8 of an inch, so actually the washi tape that I positioned for sewing the second part of my French seam is the same measurement, and I'm going to use that as a guide. I'm going to start sewing at one end of the opening on the bottom of the pocket, so do a forwards and back stitch here, and then I'm going to sew up towards the first corner. And what you want to do at the corners is to pivot on the machine needle. So you want the machine needle to go into the cloth. So I've paused and it's up. So with the wheel, I'm going to put the needle down and then actually lift the presser foot so it's not holding the cloth onto the machine anymore. Lift that up. And then I'm just going to swivel 90 degrees on the needle, so effectively turning the corner, and then pop the presser foot back down. So I know I'm back on the line of the tape here, and back on the right seam allowance, and then I can continue round. And on the pocket, you want to do that on each corner until you've stitched. So if I started sewing here, I'm going to pivot on all of these corners and then come back to leave that opening to pull the pocket through. We've sewn around the patch pockets, so now I'm just going to show you how to get them ready to put on to the apron. The first thing to do is just to snip away some of the excess across the corners so that when you turn it the right side out, it will sit better. So just with some small scissors, again cutting a triangle across, not too close to the stitching, on each corner. And then you can use the gap in the bottom to turn the pocket through to the right side out. So we've left a couple of inches at least, which makes it quite easy to do this. Like so. You can use, if you've got one, a point turner just to gently ease out the points, or you can use a chopstick. Just make sure that you don't get tempted to use your scissor ends, because the chances are they will poke right through and break through the stitching. So you just use this to gently make the corners sharp. And because you've snipped away those triangles, you've got less fabric in there, less layers of fabric right at the corners. Let's do this last one. If they're still not completely square, and sometimes it is difficult, then I usually just get the end of a pin, and from the right side now, just gently insert it and just tease the rest of that fabric out like this. And the same here. So where the opening is going to be the bottom of the patch pocket, and that will actually be closed when you stitch it onto the apron, because when you stitch it on, you'll sew round these three sides and at the same time you'll close that gap. So for now you can just press it on both sides to keep it nice and flat. Sometimes you just have to make sure, just roll the fabric out a little bit so that it sits edge to edge. If you wanted to, you could do a row of top stitching, just an inch or so below the top edge of the pocket, just for decorative purposes really, and to stop it bagging out between the layers. And otherwise, if you want to stitch on the Jenni Smith woven label, which you got with the pattern, then you can do that now before you actually attach the pockets to the apron. What we would recommend if you want to put on the woven label is to place it at one of the bottom corners of the pocket. Don't put it too close to the edge, so that when you then top stitch the pockets into position, you're not stitching across the label. So if you place the woven label about ½ inch in from the edges of the pocket, and you can pin it into position. So you can stitch the woven label in place before you then actually attach the pocket to the apron. You can use a grey cotton if you prefer to match this, and you can stitch down two sides or all the way around, but the edges of the woven labels are all sealed so that they won't fray. Now we're going to decide where we want the pockets on the front of the Hepworth apron. So the best way to do this is, first of all, just to temporarily pin the apron straps to the top of the bib so that you can try it on and decide your pocket placement. To do that, make sure the straps are crossed with the right sides of the fabric together, and pop in a pin ½ inch below the unfinished edge here, because that's what the seam allowance is going to be, so you know it's hanging in the right position, like so. And then you can just turn it around and pop it on. So just make sure the straps are sitting flat. And then you can see, hopefully, where the notches are, where we've recommended the pockets go, but actually we've had lots of people sew up different varieties. Some people prefer the pockets to be straight, in line with the seams, or obviously the big pocket goes across the centre, so it's entirely up to you. And really what you want to decide is what height you want the pockets at, so that they're functional and that your hand can reach the bottom. So I'm going to take the pocket that I've stitched up, the patch pocket. I know this is the bottom because it's got the opening here that's going to be sewn soon, and I'm going to place it between the notches there. So that's where the recommended position is, which would mean my hand would fit in to the bottom. And if you want, it's quite handy at this point to ask a friend or look in the mirror and just play around a little bit, see if you prefer them straight or how you want them to be. And then when you're happy with the final position, pop a couple of pins in, lay it back flat, and then replicate that onto the other side. You can pin them in place before you sew them. I'd also really recommend doing a basting stitch around these 3 edges, just so that it doesn't shift when you machine it on, and then you're ready to go. I've now stitched on both of the patch pockets to the front of the apron. The top tip really here is just to make sure you do a back stitch at both of the top edges here, because obviously when your hand is going into the pocket, these seams end up with quite a lot of pressure on them, so the more secure they are, the better. And then I've gone all around the edges, and at the same time I've also now closed that gap at the bottom of the pocket. And it's much easier to sew them on whilst the apron is flat, if possible, before you start to then attach the straps properly to the bib, and then you've got easier access when you're putting it under the sewing machine.